Donald Trump believes he was elected to be dictator. He said, "I'm the president of the United States and I can do whatever I want." This law does not give him the right to impose taxes at will. Congress is entitled to decide such things, and therefore these are illegitimate tariffs, and they have to go. He is going to do everything he can to reimpose the tariffs he wants. The United States is a very important trading partner for many countries, including India. Good relations with the United States matter. It is very sensible for everybody to seek alternatives as far as they can with other trading powers. We cannot bet our economy on the US.
Hello and welcome to our brand new show, India and the World. I'm Nidhi Razdan and you're watching DeKoder. Well, it has been a big blow to President Donald Trump with the US Supreme Court in a majority ruling striking down the sweeping tariffs that he imposed across the world in the last year or so. Now, this has unleashed a new round of chaos for several reasons. One, there is a lot of uncertainty about what happens to the tariffs America has already collected, whether a refund will now have to be given to those from whom it was collected. But secondly, a defiant Mr. Trump has now used other legal provisions in America to impose a new set of tariffs at first 10% and then change his mind overnight to settle at 15%. So that means effectively that all countries are subjected now to a 15% across the board tariff by the United States. He's, of course, very furious about this ruling. But as we said, it has huge repercussions, not just for the reasons stated above, but also for all economies around the world and for countries that have been negotiating or have negotiated trade deals with America, including India. In fact, India was supposed to have sent a delegation to the US this week to take those talks forward. That has now been postponed. Well, to take us through this latest round of chaos unleashed from Washington, we have Martin Wolf, the chief economics commentator with the Financial Times, who joins us from London today. Mr. Wolf, thank you very much for being with us. I wanted to begin by asking you straight off the significance, firstly, of the US Supreme Court's decision on these tariffs and the fact that, in a court that is overwhelmingly conservative, thanks to judges that Trump has also appointed, what is the message that the court has sent out to him?
Well, I suppose the most important message from that point of view is that he is still subject to the Constitution, which, of course, was in some sense obvious, but the Supreme Court itself and his own behavior have indicated that maybe he wasn't subject to the Constitution. But in this case, the Supreme Court has ruled, above all, I think that's the most striking thing as I see it, I'm not, of course, a constitutional expert, that the raising of taxes, the levying of taxes, and tariffs are clearly taxes, is a responsibility of Congress. And he has not got congressional approval for what he's been doing. He has claimed that he has, under legislation granting him powers to deal with emergencies, that he has the power and the right to impose these tariffs or taxes at will. Well, the Supreme Court has now very clearly said, and it was written by Mr. Roberts himself, the head of the court, that no, this law does not give him the right to impose taxes at will. Congress is entitled to decide such things, and therefore these are illegitimate tariffs, and they have to go.
What we have, though, seen is an expectedly furious reaction from him, and his immediate instinct was to impose a 10% tariff across the board on everyone, citing different other sections of US law which allow him to impose those tariffs, but they're for a much more limited time than what he was doing before. And then he changed his mind overnight and increased that to 15%. So in a sense, is his sort of tariffs as a tool of coercion, is that here to stay for a while?
Well, the first of all, the fury is, of course, completely predictable. Donald Trump believes he was elected to be dictator. He's made this pretty clear. He said, "I'm the president of the United States, and I can do whatever I want." I quote. So, of course, he's furious because he has the view of any despot about what he should be entitled to do. Unfortunately for him, fortunately, I think for everybody else, the Supreme Court doesn't allow it because the Constitution doesn't allow it. Now, as you notice, American trade law allows many other reasons for using tariffs, and he is entitled, as I understand it, to impose these tariffs for 150 days. What happens after that, I'm not sure. Can he renew them? Does he need to get congressional authorization for them? I suspect it's the latter, but I'm not sufficiently expert. And but what is clear is one way or the other, he is going to do everything he can to reimpose the tariffs he wants. And this will be a circus, a performance we're going to go on seeing. Whether he will get away with it in Congress, where its tariffs are very clearly not popular with the American people, the polls show that very clearly. Whether he will get away with it with the courts, those are big questions. He seems to be losing popularity, and the court has just struck him down. But this battle looks likely to last for the rest of his term, because if there's one thing Donald Trump really believes in, it's not God, it's tariffs.
That's actually true, because you're right. That's consistently been his position for a very long time. And it's interesting that you say that. And I'll come to the data points on that in just a moment about how tariffs have affected US manufacturing and jobs numbers. But before I come to that, it's also significant that India was supposed to continue its trade talks with the US this week. A trade delegation was supposed to be going this week to Washington. Uh, that's been postponed. Do you think that India and indeed other countries that are in the midst of these trade negotiations should pause these and renegotiate, start from scratch? Or are we in a position to do that, really?
I really couldn't advise the Indian or any other government what to do now. Um, there is obviously a possibility that whatever they agree will not last, will not work because of the intervention of the courts and the probable intervention of Congress, or the likely intervention of Congress now in whatever he does. So you might reach an agreement. Um, Presumably, under the present law, these are what he's now using. It's cross the board tariffs for 150 days. So that's not the basis of the agreement. So this will have to be agreement done on some other basis. My reading of American trade law, which I know a little bit about, as I said, I'm not a US trade lawyer, is that the other bits of law that allow him to impose tariffs would not allow him to do the sorts of deals he's been reaching. The cross the board tariffs, there are a whole set of procedures that have to be followed in other cases. Whether he will get away with that, I don't know. So that leaves everybody in the United States and in the rest of the world in a quandary, in a state of complete uncertainty. I suspect it might be best to negotiate in good faith, um, and see whether something can be reached that is legal in the US terms and workable for India. But you have to be open to the possibility that this isn't going to work, and then there will be further changes.
I think what you said about countries around the world being in a quandary, that's particularly significant because, for instance, in India, there's been such a political backlash to the India-US joint statement. We don't even have a trade deal in place yet, but we had a joint statement that, in a sense, give us an idea of what this interim arrangement might look like. And India has conceded a lot as well by, for instance, stopping the purchase of Russian oil. That has led to accusations that India does no longer possesses the strategic autonomy in its foreign policy that it once did. So it has put some of America's good friends, including India, in a very, very awkward position.
Oh, there's no question about that. I mean, it's put everybody in a position. Britain thought it had a 10% tariff. Now we find we have a 15% tariff, and we weren't involved in this at all. So this is everybody is in this situation. Uh, I'm not going to comment on whether the deal that the Indian government seems to be reaching with the United States makes any sense, except to say that Trump is unreliable. So you might have reached a deal and it might change for any reason, some whim of his. I mean, you just have to look at his trade policies. And of course, he's always trying to extract some other concession, investment, whatever. So it's always going to be wildly uncertain and probably not very favorable. On the other hand, the United States is a very important trading partner for many countries, including India. Good relations with the United States matter, so it makes sense to negotiate. But whether it was going to make sense in these circumstances to try, even if that's legal, to reach anything like the deal that was on the table, I don't know, because it might not stand.
I think that's an important point. And coming back to what you said about the impact of these tariffs on the US economy, I was just reading data that the New York Times put out just a couple of days ago, soon after this happened, to show that actually one of Trump's, of course, main aims was to narrow trade deficits with other countries that he said was harming American interests. And actually, in the last 1 year, most of these trade deficits with major powers have widened. And also, American manufacturing, as they wrote, hasn't made any great gains. About 80,000 jobs have been lost in the last 1 year in the American manufacturing sector. So I have to ask. I mean, these numbers are in front of Trump, who publicly, distances himself and trashes them. But why does he persist then with this tariff obsession of his, knowing full well, actually, that it's not really helping the US economy?
Well, you're asking me to psychoanalyze Donald Trump, which I think is impossible. The I find him utterly incomprehensible. But first of all, I mean, let's be obvious. First of all, Donald Trump is a man who has zero interest, and I mean zero interest in the truth. So these any facts that conflict with what he wants to believe is true is are by definition fake. That's how he defines fake. So, of course, they're fake as far as he's concerned. He has a passionate view that the United States got great and rich in the 19th century by being protectionist. He also has a passionate view that every country in the world that has a surplus with the United States, which is most countries, is ripping it off, and tariffs are the way to stop it, because they're an in the face, aggressive tax on these wicked people who are ripping us off. I think these are the two emotional bases of Trumpism in this regard. Now, coming to the data you present, well, I've argued that throughout the year, I wrote a long number of columns on this, that there was no chance it would close the current account and trade deficits, because that's not how current account and trade deficits work. You can't reduce them when you're increasing spending with a massive fiscal expansion. That just won't work. The country's close to full employment. You're reducing the labor force by sending lots of workers abroad through ICE. And you're increasing the fiscal deficit, and you want the Fed, which it fortunately isn't doing it, to loosen monetary policy. That's going to increase the trade and current account deficits, and it has. And of course, the situation in manufacturing is the US remains highly uncompetitive in many, many sectors. There is nowhere in the US to get the goods they're getting from China or Vietnam in many cases, even if the price is a little bit higher. And of course, the price is a little bit higher, as New York Fed research has recently shown. So and there isn't a labor force for this. And of course, there hasn't been the investment yet. Why hasn't there been the investment? Because, of course, people don't know whether the tariffs will last. These policies were bound to fail. There's a simple technical word for them. They're stupid.
Well, no one puts it more eloquently than you. I have to say that's pretty forthright. But what's going to happen now? And again, this is one of those questions I think we're all still wondering the answer to, which is what happens to the tariffs already collected? Will the Americans have to refund that money that they collected over the last several months? And again, that unleashes a whole new layer of chaos.
Well, I have noticed the commentary on that, and what I've seen so far from U.S. experts, they don't know. I mean, in principle, it would seem to me, as a layman looking at it from outside, if they have raised vast amounts of money, billions of dollars, illegally, contrary to the Constitution, unconstitutionally, as the Supreme Court has said, because it's ultra vires, are beyond the powers of the president to do this, then it seems to me obvious they have to give the money back. I mean, that must follow because the government isn't entitled to it. It shouldn't have it. It should go back. Now, whether they will actually give it back, because that will probably involve further legal cases, which will then get to the Supreme Court at some point. The administration will clearly fight those cases. So I imagine one thing I'm pretty confident of, the money won't come back quickly. I'm not sure of that, but it seems very unlikely to me. In the end, maybe they will be forced to pay it back, but Trump and his administration will clearly fight that to the very end. They need the money, not least.
How would you say that countries like the UK, as you mentioned, the UK had a 10% tariff, it's now gone up to 15%. How is the UK planning to navigate this? Just to get a perspective from there, what next?
I think they don't know because it was only announced on Saturday. We haven't yet had a early morning on Monday. I'm sure the government is talking about it, but in the short run, if this is stands, that his 15% tariff stands, which again I don't know, then it can be there for 150 days, as I understand it, and Britain will, I think, have nothing it can do about that during that period. But it does underline, all this underlines the reality that making a deal with this administration is impossible or very difficult for two reasons. First of all, it changes its mind all the time. And second, it's constantly pushing the law beyond the limit. And now we suddenly discover the Supreme Court exists and can overrule it. And it doesn't look as though he's going to be able to ignore it. I, for a moment, thought on Saturday, well, maybe he's going to send in the army and arrest the Supreme Court. What hasn't happened so far. So what this means is anybody doing a deal with the United States is doing a country which is now not just in the person of the president, but structurally unreliable because the president is acting essentially illegally, and the judicial process is incredibly slow and complex and doesn't deal with this very quickly. And so you are dealing with a great power, the greatest, and it's just structurally unreliable. You can't be confident in any deal. That applies to Britain, Europe, India, China, everybody.
So that brings me to the last question, which is that obviously, as you said, it's structurally unreliable America today. But what do we do? How do countries navigate this uncertainty? Because you can't ignore the US; it's just too big and just too powerful. So, what would be the best approach at this point? Would it be to delay deals as much as possible and just see where the chips fall with the Supreme Court ruling?
Well, first of all, I think it is very sensible for everybody to seek alternatives as far as they can with other trading powers. India's done a deal with the EU. That seems to me make lots of sense. I think India should be reaching out to other more reliable partners in East Asia. For example, do the best possible deals it can with China and other powers first. Second, we should obviously try to do deals with the United States, which we think are in our interests. And if and only they are, in our view, in our interests. But we have to do it in the awareness that we cannot bet our economy on the US. The Canadians have decided that, and they really are dependent on the United States. But precisely because they're so dependent, they've decided they have to seek alternatives domestically and internationally. And I think that applies to everybody. The more reliant you are, the more you have to hedge. That's a basic principle of insurance. The bigger your exposure, the more you have to hedge. That's the basic idea here, I think, for any power in the world.
Martin Wolf, always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much for joining us on DeKoder on this very big story. Let's see how the next few weeks sort of pan out on this huge tariff story. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And thanks very much for tuning in. We'll be back with much more on India and the world. So much is happening in the next few days and weeks. Do join us for much more analysis. Goodbye.